Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my February wrap-up. Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that if you don't follow my other channel, which is linked down below, it's my more personal channel where I talk about stuff that's not just book-related. I did a couple videos that a lot of you guys requested, which was my general 2017 other outside of reading goals, and my favorite non-bookish couples of 2017. So if you guys want some of those videos, they are on my other channel, which is linked down below. So I read 6 books in February, which I think was pretty good considering it was a short month. I know everyone's like, it's a short month. It's a short month by like 2 days. So I could have probably read 7 books, but you know, such is life. So I read 6 books, which I think is pretty good. I enjoyed a lot of it, so let's get into it. The first book that I read this month was The Falconer by Elizabeth May. I've actually already done a review for this one, so I'll link that on the screen, but this is one book that I read for February, which is a read-along, read-a-thon that Sarah Jane of the Book Life was doing all about reading fae books. So her and I actually buddy read this, even though I like inhale read this, and we didn't quite buddy read it together, but she forgave me, so it's fine. This follows the main character in a steampunk version of Scotland, and it's kind of like a Scottish steampunk Buffy with fae. That is my very Cliff Notes version of the synopsis. And I really liked this. I really liked the main character. I really liked the relationship dynamics, whether they were friendships or family or like found family friendship things or even a little bit of like romantic stuff. All of that I thought was really good. It was really fast paced. I also really enjoy just the like lore and stuff and the mythology and the steampunk stuff. It wasn't too overwhelming. Sometimes with steampunk stories it can just feel like so beating over the head with it, and this didn't. This just had enough of that steampunk flavor to get me through that I really enjoyed. And it left off on a cliffhanger ending, so I do plan on binge reading the rest of the series, but I'm waiting for them to all be out in paperback, and the last one is not out in paperback yet, sadly, because I would have loved to just binge read the whole series this month, but I could not, which was a tragedy. But I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the series. Then I listened to Born by Jeff Vandermeer on audiobook. This is one I actually started listening to before the BookTube SFF Award nominees came out, and this ended up being a nominee, which is really just great. So I ended up listening to this audiobook because it has the same narrator as The Hate U Give, and I love that narrator. She also did The Sun Is Also a Star. She's a great audiobook narrator. So I looked up her whole list, and I basically checked out every single book that has been narrated by her because I adore her. And this is a book that I'd already heard some good things about, so that's why I decided to pick it up, and then I got nominated, which is just hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. But this is a adult standalone science fiction novel, and it's considered like new weird, I think is what people call it, but I started referring to these books as like biotech books because it's centered around biotechnology. So it's a sci-fi that they usually end up taking place in our world, but it's where the technology and like biology have kind of fused together in some way or another. Sometimes it's like cyborg, sometimes it's like, you know, technology that's like embedded in your skin, sometimes it's like drugs, and it's kind of a combination of all that. It's kind of hard to explain unless you read it, but once you read it, you get it. I've actually read a couple books like this now, and it's a genre that I really like. So now I know that some of my favorite genres are in science fiction are like the space opera and like the biotech new weird, I guess they call it. I don't know. I have to figure out what exactly it's referred to as so I can find more books in that genre. But this follows our main character of Rachel, and she is a scavenger in this world. It's in this like post-apocalyptic-y sort of type city. A lot of stuff is going on that's not quite clear what the world has kind of turned into, but she lives in this city, and this city is basically ruled by chaos because a company is part of this city and it produced a bunch of biotech, and one time it went too far. I mean, a lot of times it went too far, but one time it really went too far, and now there's like giant flying monster bear which rampages across the city and just leaves the whole world in chaos. I know this is weird. This is why the genre is called New Weird. But one day when she's out scavenging, she finds this little creature and she brings it home. She thinks it's a plant, and it turns out to be like a little thing. And everything kind of goes from there. I know that synopsis sounds super weird, and it's supposed to, and it was weird when I first got into it, but I really enjoyed it. And at first it was just this like really quiet, kind of unassuming story. I wasn't sure like how I was feeling about it. I was feeling like it wasn't really going anywhere. But oh man, does that change? Because it's not so much like the pacing of it changes, it's like all that stuff at the beginning is so important for the later parts. So you're building this foundation of like this found family aspect because this creature is like something that's alive and that is able to communicate and stuff, and all this stuff goes on because of it. And it's a really good exploration of like characters and relationships, and by the end of it I was so invested in these characters. I was really invested in the relationships with one another. I was very intrigued about the world. I just wanted them to build like this life, and even the two main human characters, they have like this romantic thing going on, and I am so invested in them. So invested in them. So this ended up just blowing away my expectations. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The half off stars just because the beginning was kind of like, what's going on, but it does just build this foundation of just like feeling that you have for these characters, and I love this book. I'm going to be doing a full review for it because it is a BookTube SFF Award nominee later on in the month, so you'll hear more of my thoughts, but I would definitely recommend giving this a shot. I know it sounds weird, but it's supposed to be, and it's really good. I then picked up The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This was a continued read for February, more Fae books. And I've done a full review and discussion on this book already, so go ahead and check that out if you want more of my in-depth thoughts. I will link that on the screen. But this has been an incredibly hyped book, and I didn't feel like this quite lived up to the expectations. I had expectations going in just because it was hyped, but I didn't know anything about it going in. I didn't know anything about the plot. I just went in and tried it out, went in pretty much blind, and I just felt like it didn't do anything super original. It's Fae that are cruel. That's pretty typical of Fae. Fae are supposed to be like that, and I felt like the book had some pacing issues where it should have spent more time in like the middle section, and it really didn't, and then it really started to speed up towards the end, and that seems to be that everybody agrees with that like the end is like the best. And I just felt like it could have been paced much better, and then some of the characters felt pretty inconsistent, but I did like a lot of the things that happened towards the end and the foundation that it created for the later books in the story. So I'm going to continue with the series. I think it's going to end up being a series that gets better with each book, but I don't think this first book is as mind-blowing as some people think that it is. I don't think that they're lying about it. I just think that this wasn't exactly for me, and that I've read better fleshed out stories. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. Excited for its potential, but not a groundbreaking story by any means. I then listened to The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater on audiobook. I am finally done with the Raven cycle. It was a series that I wasn't sure I was going to continue for a long time, and I'm glad that I did. I listened to the last 2 books on audio, which was really great, and it was a really good audiobook experience. I really ended up enjoying this series. I love the atmosphere of this series. This is the final book in the Raven cycle, and so I'm not going to talk about much of the plot and stuff, and most people know about the Raven cycle by now anyway, but I love the atmosphere and I love the characters. I think the plot overall of the entire arc of the story is a little weak, that Maggie really focuses more on like the atmosphere and the characters and the character relations, and if she could have just written a book that was about these characters' interactions with one another, then she would have, and just not had any plot. Because the plot is like mostly just thrown in there randomly. A lot of stuff is not resolved very well, and it's just kind of like, oh wait, we're supposed to have a plot, not just like these characters staring into each other's eyes and speaking in like metaphor and allegory and all this stuff. Like, it's just, yeah. But I still really enjoyed this. I love these characters, and I think this world is really great. I just wish some of the plot things were a little bit stronger, but I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I'm going to be doing a full spoiler-free review for the whole series, as well as a discussion that will mostly focus on the last book as like a wrap-up of the series, but a whole series discussion coming up on Monday here on my channel, so you can look forward to that if you want my whole thoughts on the series, because I haven't reviewed any of the books in the series since I read the first one for fear of spoilers, and I managed to get through the whole series without being spoiled, which is a miracle, honestly. I then read another series finale, and that is Immortal Reign by Morgan Rhodes. This is the 6th and final book in the Fallen Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes. I've done a full review again for the whole series, as well as a discussion for the whole series, which I will link on the screen for you to check out. This book was better than the last book in the series, which I thought was abysmal and is dead to me. But I don't think it recovered as much as I was hoping it would, so it ultimately was kind of disappointing for me. I think if you've recently read the series, or if you're binge reading the series, it might not feel as bad, but I had so much time for my taste to change, for my expectations to change, to build up in my head, all this stuff. It's very hard to kind of like separate all these previous feelings of like the other books in the series from like this one, and having all this attachment to these characters, but ultimately I feel like it wrapping up in a lot of ways too easily, too quickly. They're not being, as I complain about a lot with YA fantasy finales, they're not being any kind of emotional impact really, there being no sense of danger, just a lot of things, which I talk about in my review, and I talk about in my discussion, so you can go and check those out for more of my in-depth thoughts. But ultimately this wasn't a very satisfying conclusion for me. I liked the way that some things wrapped up. It was still like a fast-paced, easy read like all these books always are. I was still happy to see my characters, but I think that the amount of POVs that end up being in the series towards the later books threw it off course and made it not as tight of a story. The plot just kind of got all over the place, and the character arcs were a little bit messy as well because there were so many of them that we couldn't really wrap up well. So I gave this 2 to 2.5 stars. I'm still sitting there like, because part of me wants to give it 2.5 stars fully because it's like right there in the middle, but part of me is also like, it's a little less than the middle, you know? So I'm very torn. It's hard to kind of separate out all my feelings about this series that I've been invested in for like almost 4 years at this point. But it was not a very satisfying conclusion for me, sadly. And lastly, I read Autonomous by Anna Lee Newitz. Now this is another kind of new weird biotech science fiction genre book. It is a standalone adult science fiction book, and it follows a couple of main characters, but one of them is Jack, and she is this anti-patent pharmacy pirate. So what she ends up doing is, in this world, all of these like big pharma companies have patents on all these drugs, so people are like dying by not getting the drugs they need, but there's also these like non-medical drugs are just used for like, you know, work and vitality and like all this stuff. And she ends up re-engineering and retro-engineering some of these drugs to get them on the market to both make money, but then to also like fund some of her projects for getting like medical drugs on the market and stuff. So she's this pirate, she lives in the submarine, blah, blah, blah. One of the drugs that she ended up reverse engineering ends up going bad, and it's a drug that makes people into like workaholics, and they become addicted to work to the point that they end up causing disasters. Some of them ended up dying. It's like this whole problem. So she ends up trying to figure this out, but while that's happening, this company that's kind of in charge of all these patents and stuff ends up sending a couple of agents after her. So one of them is like this human military guy, and the other one is a military AI robot, and they go after her. So you're following kind of all of them. And it's such an interesting story. It took me a little bit to kind of get into it and attach to the characters, but I ended up being really invested in the characters. There are a lot of like flashbacks in all of their lives. There's a lot of discussion of like just AI stuff, like, you know, what makes a person, and a lot of stuff related to gender. There's this whole thing with the robot and kind of like what their gender is and what that means to other people and what that means to them, and like sexuality and stuff, which is really interesting and something I wasn't expecting to get. And all of these characters are morally gray characters. They are not, none of them is like really completely right or wrong. You attach to all of them, or at least I did, and then they're kind of on opposing sides. You're like, what do I want to happen? And you all kind of make poor decisions sometimes, and some of you are doing really bad things, but you all think that you're right. And it's just like this kind of, it's so interesting to kind of follow, because you're like, this is very stressful. And I just really like this world where this is, the biotech in here is very based around like robotics and AI, and then like these drugs, which I think is really interesting. So it was just a really cool world, really fast paced and fun, and just something I wasn't really expecting. So I ended up really enjoying this one, and I'm going to be doing a full review for this one as well. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that is it for all the books that I read in February. Comment below, let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all you guys soon. Bye!